Okay, so we're going to get started with exercise 216. We're moving forward in the setup of kind of good background imagery, reflection of sky, and that sort of thing. And so last class, we went through and we put a sun in the scene, and then we attached a sky to the scene, and you guys got the fade to the darker blue like a perfectly clear sky would look. Though sometimes we'd like a little bit more than that. We'd like clouds to our environment and what have you. So this part of the puzzle can take some work to get it set up right. And it's kind of a multiple moving part equation that we have to solve. One of the things that I have prepared for you guys is on the Digital Tools site. If you go under Resources and you go to the V-Ray Materials Library, the second option down says Quick Rendering Setups. And so these quick rendering setups, we're not going to actually use the settings today because I'm going to make you learn how to do the settings to begin with. But we will use the HDRI backgrounds as part of it. But what I've done for you is I've set up a basic day scene 1, scene 2, and scene 3. And so you can see in these little previews the clouds and the sun and that sort of thing in the sky. These are all set up so that you can use them rather easily in your work. As you keep going down, I have a basic night scene. We're going to get to that. I have a basic night scene 2. And then you keep coming down, and I have a sunset scene 1, a sunset scene 2, and a sunset scene 3. And then at the very bottom is something called a clay rendering. We'll get to that later in the semester. So these are all designed to be helpful to you so that actually, ultimately, you'll be able to just download what's called a VisOp file, and it'll load all the settings for you, and you won't have to worry about it too much. However, today, maybe down the road, you'll want to either create your own HDRI or you'll find your own HDRI online somewhere, and you'll want to be able to set up the settings correctly so that you could do the rendering on those as well. So as I start to look at these, I'm pointing these as an example. There's a couple components to these sites. One is there's an image file that's called an HDRI that needs to be downloaded that you're going to use as your background image. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. There's also a few other things that we need to pay attention to today. One is our sun settings. So what time of day does this photo occur that's in the background? We'll have to pay attention to our camera settings. And there may be a few other things that are set up for you. The reflection and refraction background is also one other little piece that we'll be adjusting as we go forward. So for our purposes today, I would encourage you to download day scene 1, 2, or 3. It doesn't matter which one you pick, but download one of these sets. Probably 1 or 2 would be better choices, though I think they'll all work just fine. In some cases, as you're going here, I do have direct downloads of the files themselves. So all it takes is clicking on it, and it'll start downloading the zip file with the information in it. In other cases, I have to see where it is. I have to sort it out. Some of them you actually have to, like this one here. It's free, but you have to purchase it for no money, and I'm not allowed to redistribute it to you by the licensing agreement, so you have to go get it yourself. But we're not using the Sunset Scene 2 today anyway, but you may end up wanting to do it at some point, in which case you'll have to work it. So if you go to, Resources, V-Ray Materials Library, it's under Quick Rendering Setups. It's the second one down right there. So for today's purposes, download that first one or the second one. These are from a guy who makes these, duck360hdr.com. He has a bunch of really high resolution ones, if you go to his website, that you can purchase and download. The ones that I'm sharing with you are just his free ones. You could get them just as easily here. So when it comes to our scene, and I apologize, somehow I lost my file from last class, so this is the file from the semester before. It doesn't make any difference for what you're looking at. We need to start setting up this scene and understanding how it's going to work with this HDRI background image. But before I get into the scene itself, I want to open up the HDRI just so you can see what it is as we go forward. So let me go ahead and go into my flash drive. You don't have to do this on your own. I'm just going to show it to you. I keep all of my HDRI images in my resources folder in V-Ray under V-Ray HDRI, and then I have them categorized by day, night, and sunset HDRIs. So I'm going to go into day, and let me make sure that I'm doing the one that I said I was going to do, which is this first one. It's 002. There it is. Oops. Why is that a zip file? There it is. So essentially what these are, and I'm going to open up the preview version of this so you guys can see the preview. Essentially what it is, it's a, oh come on, let me open it in Photoshop. Like I said, I'm opening the preview so you can see it. Essentially what it is it is a 360-degree panorama. So if you took RT 135 and remember back to that lecture, I talked about panoramas. This particular file, if I were to take this edge and that edge and curl it around behind me, they would come together and meet up. Furthermore, the top edge and the bottom edge would come together as if it were like a globe, a sphere, and we were on the inside of it. So it curls around us behind and all the way around the top. That's what one of these is designed to be. It's a little bit more than just the panorama. The panorama certainly helps, but the other part of it is it's a high dynamic range image. And so we also talked about that in 135. But the idea here is it's a greater range of light being captured by the camera. So they took multiple exposures at different settings and compiled all of those together. We don't see that as much in the preview version. The preview is just a static image. But there is, in each of these files, a special version. It's right here. It's called the REF in this particular case. That's a Photoshop file. This is a high dynamic range image in its raw state. And the reason that this is valuable is we can load this into Rhino and or V-Ray, and when it does the rendering, it's going to change the background based on our camera settings and our exposure settings. So it's going to adjust, which is part of the power of using this kind of an image. So anyway, we're going to end up using that. This REF version is the full color background image. The ENV file is the same thing, but it's an environment file. It's for the environmental lighting, the reflected light. And I'll show you where each of those go. But I like to at least introduce those as a concept so that you're aware of them. Anyway, so now I need to go ahead and work in my Rhino scene and start bringing these pieces to the table. So let me go to my layers first, and I should have created last class an environment layer, and on that environment layer I probably have a layer for sun. Chances are that your sun is not correct right now, and so I'm going to go ahead and select the objects that are on the sun layer. It added one directional light, and I'm going to go ahead and delete it because I don't need it. And you wouldn't have the sphere layer, yes, so let me get rid of that. Okay, so I have the SF model layer, which in my case is a V-Ray proxy object. That's why you're not seeing all of it. If yours is the full model, that's fine. Either way, we could actually turn it off. Then I have the environment layer with a sublayer of sun. And then I have my building itself that got brought in. I have my building site, and I have my building itself that got brought in as a block reference. When I bring in the HDRI as the background image, I'm going to do it by going to my V-Ray options. So I'll click on the O button of my V-Ray options toolbar, and that will bring up my V-Ray option editor. What I'm going to do, you don't have to do this, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to restore all the default settings. So I'm going to go back to my defaults because I don't know on this particular file, because it was not from last class before spring break, but that from last year, I don't know what my settings were. So I'm just resetting everything to the defaults. And now that I'm in the defaults, I need to start bringing in these various components. Each thing that I'm talking about right now is written out in a tutorial. So V-Ray 8.24 HDRI, for example, is doing what I'm doing right now. And so what I need to do is I need to bring in that background image so that V-Ray knows that's going to be my background. So I'll click on the Environment tab right here. And here in the Environment tab, I'm going to bring in, and I'll start with the reflection or refraction background. I'll click on the lowercase m button. And this is where last class we went down here and we chose text sky. Remember that? Instead of that, I'm going to choose a text bitmap. And I'm going to go find that HDRI image. I'll go to my OneDrive. I'm going to go into my resources. I'm going to go to my V-Ray. I'm going to go to my V-Ray HDRI, into my day folder, and I'm going to choose the free 002. That was the one I downloaded today. And because I'm not in the environment file, I'm in the regular background, I'm going to pick that. So I'm not picking the previews. I'm picking the actual REF file. This is usually a .hdr, which is what it is in this case, or a .odf, I think is the other one. Maybe it's an ODR. I don't know. You may encounter that. Either one, it'll recognize. Either one. I'm just looking to see if it's written here. Maybe it's a .exr. It might be a .exr. Anyway, so there it is. And I'll go ahead and say OK, or open. And it's going to bring in that particular file. But there's more to it than this. So before I move on, I'm going to scroll down toward the bottom of this window. Let me make it a little bit bigger so you guys can see it. And at the bottom, I have a UVW little box. The UVW type is set to general channel right now. I need to change that to environment. So it's going from the general channel to the environment channel. And my mapping type here is going to be listed as spherical. That's important. Yeah. Okay, so let me say OK. I'll do it again. So I'm going to click on the M button right here next to reflection or refraction background. And when I do that, it's going to bring up this V-Ray texture editor box. I'm going to click on this ... button and go find the HDR file. It should be the REF. And say open. Yeah. This should be listed as text bitmap right here. And then you'll have the ... I'm going to do this again for the environment anyway. And then I'll pick the REF and I'll say open. And then at the bottom of this, I have to change the UVW to general environment. And I have to change the mapping type to spherical if it's not already done. At this point, if I click preview, I should see a preview that looks like a normal image. It might be too dark, but it should look rather normal, where I see a horizon and whatever. That's a good sign. So I'll go ahead and say OK. And now I'm going to move up to the GI skylight one. So once again, I'll click on the lowercase m. And I'll move, instead of saying none, I'll come down to text bitmap. And this time, I'm going to pick the ENV. So the person who created this HDRI was nice enough to name one as a reference file, one as an ENV. So I know this is the one for the environment. And I'll go ahead and click open. The ENV version, you could use the regular version of it. What it is it's basically a blurred version. So it's not quite so sharp on its edges. That's going to provide good reflected light off of clouds. So if you think about a cloudy day, if you're standing out there, there may be some direct sun that's falling on you, but there's also a bunch of light that's reflected off the clouds. We need to simulate that light that's reflected off the clouds. That's what this is setting up. I'll go ahead and say open. Once again, at the very bottom, under the UVW, I need to change from the general channel to the environment channel. And I need to make sure that my mapping type is set as spherical. I can click preview to see this version. and you'll see that it's much blur. It's a blurry version of the same thing. And I'll go ahead and say OK. So at this point, I've established the environment. I have a background HDRI, and I have a GI, or a global illumination reflection set up. But I don't currently have a sun yet, nor do I know what time of day or location the person who took this HDRI took it. So I need to figure out what time of the day needs to be. And I have two different ways of going about doing this, and I'm going to show you the strategy that I think works best. So I'm going to go ahead and turn off my building site altogether, so I have nothing on, and I'll create a new sublayer under environment called sphere. And on this sphere layer, which I'll make current, I'm going to do two things. One, I'm going to install a V-Ray infinite plane. So I could type viz infinite plane, or I could click the infinite plane button in V-Ray. It's going to show up somewhere. There it is. And then I'm going to create a sphere. So I'll come in here and create a sphere with the diameter. Doesn't matter how big it is. I just need a sphere. There it is. I need it to be above my infinite plane. So I'm going to switch into one of my side views and move it up. Doesn't have to be precise. We just need it to be close. So now this sphere is sitting on top of an infinite plane, like that. So I have the sphere sitting on top of the infinite plane. I'm going to assign a very reflective material to this sphere, like a chrome. So it's like a mirror. You guys have seen, like, people decorate their lawns with those balls that are like the chrome balls. They're really ugly, right? No offense if you have them, but they are really ugly. That's what we're creating, because we need that reflection right now. It's going to get deleted later on. So with that selected, I'm going to go into my V-Ray material library, and I'm going to load up Chrome. I happen to already have it in this file because I loaded it before. You guys can go to the load material, go into your OneDrive, go into your resources, V-Ray, V-Ray materials. It's under metal. There it is. You should see Chrome. And you're doing just the regular Chrome. You're not doing the blurry or the matte. You're just picking regular old Chrome. I already have it, so I'm not going to reload it. And I'm going to assign Chrome to that sphere. So with the sphere selected, I'll right-click on Chrome and say Apply Material to Selection. It now has a Chrome material on it. So at this point, I have a highly reflective material. If I were to look down on this object, I'd see a reflection of the sky, which is what I want. It's going to give me that reflection. And I'll show you how this works a little bit later on. So at this point, I need one other piece, and that is the sun. So I'll switch to the sun layer, and I'm going to drop the sun in somewhere. So I'll click on sun. I'm going to uncheck manual control, and I'm going to come down here. This is just like last class. I'm going to say this is San Francisco. There it is. I'll come up here, I'll change the time of day, and I'll pick some time. So I'm doing 9:30 in the morning today. Oh, daylight savings is on. There we go. So there it is, 9:30 in the morning. I have no idea if this is going to match up with my cloud or not. My guess is it won't. But I need to put the sun in nonetheless. So I'll say OK. And I need to actually drop it in. I'll drop it in at 0, 0. There it is. So I have a sun, I have a sphere, I have an infinite plane. Everything else is off on my objects. I need to, just like last class, I need to set up my camera to be on. So I'll go to my V-Ray options. I'll go to my camera. My physical camera needs to be turned on. I'll leave the shutter speed at 200. So now it's time to do a rendering. I'll get to the rendering I want you to do, but I just want to show you that if I were to do a rendering right now, I would get just this white surface at the ground, and I get a reflection of the sky, and you'd see the sun. The sky reflection is really dark right now. If I were to do a rendering where we actually saw the sky would end up being way too dark. So I need to adjust for that value. So to adjust for that, I'd go to my VRay options. Once again, I go back to my environment drawer, and I'm going to increase this number in the reflection, refraction background. So currently it's set for 1.0. I'm going to increase that. I happen to know that it needs to change to about 6 because I've done this before. Okay, but you would do a test on it. Sorry, VRay just crashed on me. Let's try that one more time. You would do a test and decide, is 3 enough? Is 5 enough? Oh, 6 is about right. Once I have it, I can render it again just to double check. Now that feels a lot better in terms of the background. So now I'm going to switch my view altogether out of perspective, and I'm going to look in the top view. Let me go to set view top, so I'm looking straight down at this object. There it is. And when I do a render now, I'm looking down on the object. I can very clearly see the shadow that's being cast by the sun that I installed, and I can see where the sun is being reflected in the sky. So the sun here doesn't match up with where the shadow is being cast. The sun would need to rotate around to be right here for it to work. Does that make sense? So I'd see with the shadow being right here, I would need the image to rotate so that the sun was there, or I need to rotate my sun to a different time of day so that it would match up over here. So I have 2 different ways of doing it. I can change the image, the HDRI background, or I can change the sun or the time of day. Either way works, and I'll show you both. So first option would be to change the sun. So right now the sun's pointing here. I need it to point that way. So I'll come back to my sun, and I'll change the time of day. I'll click on the light that represents my sun. I'll go to Properties. I'll go to my Light Properties, and I'll click on Modify Sun. Uncheck Manual Control. Come back down through there. We need San Francisco. There it is. Come back up here. It's going to be toward the afternoon, so I'm going to say maybe 3:30 in the afternoon. And we'll leave it on today, and I'll go ahead and say OK. It's going to move, and now it's pointing that way. So if I were to do a render, my shadow is now on the opposite side, and it's matching up much closer to where my sun is. My sun probably needs to be a little bit earlier in the day, so the shadow is going up this way just a little bit more. So I'd go back to my options, modify the sun, uncheck manual control, come down San Francisco, come back up here. I did it at about 3:30. Let's go back in time. Let's go back to like 2:30, 2:15, something like that. I'll say OK. There I am adjusted. Now if I went to render, yep, looks pretty good now. So I changed my sun to match up with my HDRI background image. The other option to this is if you wanted your sun at a particular time of day, you could change the HDRI background image to match. So in that scenario, let me say I wanted oops, sorry. It's in the middle of the night right now. Let's say I really did want it at 9:30 in the morning. So it was pointing that way. In this scenario, once again, if I did the render, the sun's staying in the same place, but the shadow's in the wrong place. In this scenario, I'm going to go into my V-Ray options. I'm going to go to my reflection or refraction background. And at the very bottom here, in this UVW, I'm going to change the horizontal rotation to, I'm trying to think of how far I need to go. Let's do 230. That's what I'm going to guess. I'll say OK. I'll render. There you go. It's probably a little less. It's probably about 220. So I rotated the background image where the sun is. It used to be over here. I put that around here. So now it's matching up more closely with the time of day. It's probably a little bit less. Let me go back to my refraction background. At the very bottom here, I said my horizontal rotation was at 230. It might be closer to 210. I'll say OK. I'll close it. I'll render again. Oh, it needs to be more. I was going the wrong direction. Go back. At the very bottom here, I'll do 245. There you go. That's about right. So, two different strategies. Rotate the background to match your time of day, or change the time of day to match the background. In an ideal world, you would have visited the site. You would have all the correct camera equipment to take your own HDRI. You'd take it at a specific time of day. You'd know exactly what time of day that was, what year it was, what the date was, in which case it would match up nicely. We don't have that luxury because we're borrowing HDRIs from other people. Therefore, we have to be able to adapt our work. That's essentially what we're looking for. We're looking to match up this reflection to where the shadow is. In the tutorial that I have written out where we're doing this, which is 8.26, I have the images that I have in that show this at a side view, which is much harder to see. If you do it in the top view, it's much easier to get them to line up correctly. So I suggest doing it in the top view rather than the side view. Once I have this, my time of day matches up nicely with my sun. Now it's time to go back to my view with all of my buildings and that sort of thing in it. So I'm going to go back to my layers. I'm going to turn off the sphere layer. I'm going to leave the sun on because it's at the right time of day. I'll turn back on my model. I'll turn back on my building site and or my building. I'll set myself into the perspective 1 view. There it is. I'll go to my V-Ray options and adjust the output. So we'll come down here to output. Remember, I had this set really small initially to make sure it was looking the way I wanted it to. So we'll do a height of maybe 300 and a width of 100 just to do a quick test. And I'll do a render. And I know it's going to be blurry when I do this, but I'm doing that as a way of testing, is this actually working? Looks like my materials got lost because, like I said, this was my file from last semester, so I need to go back to my block and reassign the materials and fix those problems. But we can see that the sky is showing correctly, the daylight showing correctly. I'm getting those clouds in the sky, which is what I wanted. So all of it's working. Now would be the time to update the size of the rendering and do the final version. Okay? So I walked you through today putting the HDRI in, adjusting it to match the time of day, either adjusting the sun to match the HDRI or the HDRI to match the sun. Then in part 3, I asked you to go back and make sure you've assigned your materials correctly. If you're doing the skyscraper glass material will help you out a little bit to getting that reflective rendering that you need. The last thing that I'm going to encourage you to do is V-Ray 8.25 will have you turn on some channels in your rendering. It's a little bit premature because you won't be using the channels yet, but these channels are designed to help you, like if you're doing collage work in Photoshop later on, they can really help. So if you turn them on now, it won't impact your renderings at all. V-Ray does all of these anyway, but it allows you to start saving them and getting the habit of saving them. So in my V-Ray options, when that opens up, I'm going to click on the VFB channels drawer. And in this drawer, I have a variety of things that I can pick. So RGB color is the actual color rendering. Alpha gives us a transparency value. Background will render just the background and show us just the background. So let me turn on background wherever it is. The other one that I'm going to turn on is Z-depth. Z-depth won't mean anything to you until later in the semester, but you might as well get in the habit of having it on. And somewhere in here I'll have background. There it is. There's a few other ones that ultimately I'll encourage you to turn on. Once they're on, you can close them. You can do your rendering. And again, I'm doing the small version of the rendering. But I'll show you what they are. Okay, so there it is. This little drop-down menu right here shows RGB color right now. All of those channels will show up here. So I did an alpha channel. If I click on that, it shows me the sky versus the foreground, which is great for collage work. This should look a lot like a mask in Photoshop. Hint, hint, right? Z-depth gives us a range from white to black the further away you are. So the closer to your camera, the more white it is. The further away you are from the camera, the more gray and or ultimately black. There's some adjustments that we'll make to this long term to fine tune it, but this can allow us to do a lens blur effect. So we can keep something in the foreground sharp and something in the background can be blurred as if we were shooting with a low aperture, or excuse me, a high aperture, low aperture. Low f-stop, high aperture, sorry. We can mimic that in Photoshop. So it's really good later on. For right now, it doesn't matter, but you might as well get in the habit of doing it. The last one is the background. It should save just the background with no transparency on it. It's very similar to the alpha. If my building here had transparency, that would show up in the alpha channel. But I don't have the right material assigned to it, which is why it's not showing up. From now on, once you turn these channels on, when you go to save, don't click the single disk icon. Right next to it is a multiple disk. If you do that save, it will save all of the channels at once plus your RGB. So get in the habit of turning the channels on and then using the multiple disks to save them all. And it'll give you the channels, which long term, I promise, will be very valuable. Okay, that's where we're going. I just like to kind of give you that as we go forward. Okay, so today your purpose is HDRI, followed with getting the sun system set up correctly and matching up with your HDRI. That's our goal for today. Work on your materials a little bit, give me a rendering out the other end. I'm going to go to the bookstore now that it's a sunny day. I apologize that we didn't do this before spring break, but I'm going to go get the cardboard. I'm going to laser cut the model. When I do the laser cutting, anybody who has never laser cut before, I would encourage you to come in. I'll walk you through the process. If you've laser cut and this is totally easy for you, you don't have to come in. You can work on stuff in here. That's fine. I will then come back and glue the whole model together on the table in the back, or at least a part of it, so that I can explain the process. If somebody has an X-Acto knife and if somebody has some tacky glue, that would be really helpful, because I don't, because mine have wandered off over time. And then I'll go through that with you. If for some reason you missed it, or you miss it today, or what have you, it is available under, I think it's Physical Modeling 6.1. I think at the bottom there's a video, yeah, right here, where I go through it. So if you miss it or whatever, you can watch it there too. Okay, so you guys are going to be a little bit on your own for this HDRI. Carla's going to be here if you get really stuck while I go get the laser cutter stuff. Okay, but obviously I will be back. It's not going to take me 3 hours to laser cut the stuff, I hope. So I'll come back here before I go to the laser cutter room to invite people that have never laser cut before to come over, and I'll walk you through the process. Okay? Good deal.